Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So our topic today is Caraka as the Yogiraj of Ayurveda, and I would like to deal with this topic in three sections. First, we will try to learn a little bit about Caraka as a person, and then we will discuss something about the great work that he has contributed in the form of Charaka Samhita. And thirdly, we will look at his teachings, his message. I mean, what is it that we can, project as a takeaway message on the occasion of the International Day of Ayurveda. So this is how I would like to, proceed. So first, of course, this is the most challenging part of, studying about ancient Indian literature and their authors, because you can see even in Charaka Samhita, there is an attempt to downplay the importance of individuals who may have discovered knowledge. I mean, this biography of individuals is very difficult to build up in the ancient Indian traditions. People preferred anonymity and they ascribed, they didn't want to own the knowledge. I mean, it is a discovery of knowledge that is there in nature. So we find the same challenge. We can't see into the mist of time. There are so many challenges in constructing the complete personality of, great sages like Charaka. But with the help of whatever information we have, I would like to first give a sketch of Charaka as a person. So it is believed that Charaka belonged to, the what you call as the before the Common Era, about 200 BCE. That much we know. And regarding his identity as a person, there are so many views and understandings which I will very briefly share. But out of all this cacophony, there is a very strong message that comes about Charaka as a personality and his involvement with yoga, which is what I would like to emphasize in our discussion today. So this is, of course, an imaginary, construction of Charaka as a person. He was definitely a sage, and he has been given the title of a Maharshi. So there are so many views about the identity of Charaka, and historians are divided in their opinion, and it doesn't make sense to go too much into hair-splitting arguments about who was Charaka. But there's a lot of interesting symbolisms and messages even in the name of Charaka. So I would like to focus more on what is the takeaway message that we can get from all the various views on Charaka's personality. So, the name Charaka is there right from the Vedic period. So some say that Charaka and Manava represent two Vedic schools, and Charakas formed one of the shakhas of Krishna Yajurveda, and Charaka Shakha was opposed to the Taittiriya Shakha. So these are difficult names like Charaka or even Sushruta, Bharadwaja. They are names that even after a while represented a particular school or group a school of thought, or even a group of, individuals representing certain viewpoints, that even Charaka is given the status of a title. So many people could have been known by the name of Charaka, and this is one of the challenges historians are facing. Which Charaka are we talking about when we look at, Ayurveda and Charaka Samhita? And this is not a problem that is easily, solvable. But the thing is, Charaka is a name that we can see right from the Vedic period. And there is also a view that Charaka was a physician attached to the court of Kanishka. This is another viewpoint. So since this Charaka was a physician, there is a strong opinion that he was the author of the Charaka Samhita. So if you look at the Puranas, the pupils of Vaishampayana were also known as Charakas, and Vaishampayana himself was known as Charaka. And that brings us to this, the etymology of the word Charaka itself, which I will discuss in a short while. But one of the most dominant views in Ayurveda about the identity of Charaka is that Charaka was the incarnation of Patanjali. So Charaka Samhita actually is a transformation of an earlier textbook called as Agnivesha Tantra. Agnivesha was a student of a great sage Atreya, and his colleagues like Bhela, Jatukarna, Parashara, they were all contemporaneous, and today we have only the Bhela Samhita available to us. And Charaka is supposed to have worked and refined the Agnivesha Tantra, and his contributions were so substantial that it came to be known in his name. So we see Patanjali is basically a Bhashyakara. Like we know in Ashtadhyayi also, he has actually done a Bhashya on an existing work, making it more contemporaneous, relevant. And so I think that is one interesting message that we get from Charaka's personality, that even if we look at Charaka as a manifestation of Patanjali, the entire focus is on, consolidating existing knowledge, systematizing it, and making it relevant for that particular time. And this procedure Charaka also mentions in the Charaka Samhita, Vistarayati Leshoktam, Sankshipatyati Vistaram, Samskarta Kurudek Tantram Puranam Cha Punarnavam. So by elaborating on points which are not so explicitly discussed, and by making more brief the sections which are too elaborate, the samskarta or the redactor makes even an old text appear new. So this is basically, when you look at Charaka as Patanjali, even the Yoga Sutras is not an invention of yoga, but it is rather a systematization of the existing knowledge, to make it contemporaneous. So I think that is very, very relevant today. That's what we learn from Charaka, that the knowledge has to be systematized. It has to be made as comprehensive as possible. And now Charaka is also a name that we see. This is also very interesting, that Charaka has taken the knowledge of Ayurveda, to different parts of the world. Charaka was famous also in the Islamic world. I want to also discuss on the meaning of the name Charaka, but I think I'll do that at the end. That would be a very good way to sum up the personality of Charaka. But in the meantime, we'll just look at how Charaka was an influence also worldwide. So the Charaka Samhita was translated into Persian by a person known as Manka, or perhaps Manikya. He's said to have gone to Baghdad from India on the request of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, and Manak is mentioned in Kitab al-Bayan and all that. So it was further translated into Arabic from Persian. So Charaka is a global personality, and this is also very interesting. Many centuries after the composition of the Charaka Samhita, Charaka has been recognized in almost all the major medical traditions of the world. And many Arabic authors actually mention Charaka, like Ali ibn Sahal al-Tabari, Ibn al-Nadim, Wadi al-Kubi. These are all people who mention Charaka. And the work Madin al-Shifa draws a lot of content actually from Charaka Samhita itself. So we can say that Charaka as a person had a profound global influence. Charaka was also translated into Tibetan and from Tibetan into Mongolian, and references to the Tibetan translation can be seen in certain works. So the Tibetan medical tradition also talks about a work called Charakasi Brigade. So this is again an indication that Charaka as a person had, far-reaching influence. And Charaka discusses so many personalities, so many names in the Charaka Samhita. So those names are listed here. Chavana, Devala, many of them are, Vedic sages. And this is a very interesting reference to other authorities. These also have been used by historians to, get some clues about the identity of Charaka. But there are challenges because the Charaka Samhita itself has multiple layers. So this is the one challenge when we are trying to construct the personality of Charaka, because the innermost layer, the oldest layer of Charaka Samhita is, of course, the Agnivesha Tantra. And on that, we have Charaka's redaction. And then a lot of missing portions were filled by Dridabhala. So it's very difficult to identify which portions of the text belong to which period. Scholars are still working on this. So Charaka, in that sense, most of these old texts, Charaka Samhita, Sushruta Samhita, present, challenges for historical analysis because of their complex, multi-layered, nature. So what is Charaka actually recognized for is for reformatting Agnivesha Tantra into Sutra, Bhashya and Sangraha sections. That is a function of a Samskarta. So we see here Charaka as a person who, updates knowledge, who tries to bring into one compilation the essence of all existing knowledge. So this is a statement that also the Charaka Samhita gives. Yadi hasti tadanyatra yanne hasti na tat kvachit. Agnivesha kride tandre Charaka pradi samskride. Yadi hasti tadanyatra. What is found here can be found elsewhere, but what is not found here cannot be found anywhere else. So this is also a spirit of, continuous updation and making the knowledge relevant for that particular time. I think this is one of the key messages that we get from Charaka Samhita. And systematization of the knowledge. So Charaka Samhita tells us that, systematization of knowledge is a continuous process, and we just cannot look back to old literature and, consider that as, completely timeless. Charaka is very much talking about the essential principles which are timeless, but then that the applications and presentations need to be, made relevant to that particular time and place. So Agnivesha Tantra was reformatted into Sutra, Bhashya and Sangraha. This is a very special style of Charaka Samhita, where everything is mentioned very briefly, just like an abstract that we have today in a research presentation. There is the abstract and introduction, then there is the section of elaboration, and then there is the conclusion. I mean, this is the style in which all the chapters of Charaka Samhita has been constructed. And this is considered to be a very unique contribution of Charaka to the text of Agnivesha Tantra. And Charaka uses prose and verse very conveniently and in a very mature style. The Sanskrit language is also very poetic and very profound. And there are very specific, so scholars have identified what exactly could have been the contributions of Charaka, where he has added new verses and compiled from other texts, from usages like Bhavati Chatra, Bhavatas Chatra, or Bhavanti Chatra. So there has been an attempt also to identify those sections of Charaka Samhita which has been the unique contributions of Charaka, called as Pratisamskartra Sutra. So we will come back to the content a little later, but just to show the personality of Charaka, I mean, what was the impact of Charaka on Agnivesha Tantra? I'm just listing a few concepts here. Bringing yukti as pramana, or multi-causality. This is a very unique feature of Charaka Samhita, and probably so this gives us an idea of Charaka as also a very rational person. His emphasis on yukti vipashya treatment, or rational approaches to treatment, identifying cause and effect. In fact, there are certain very clear statements in Charaka Samhita which we don't find in other texts, like Sarvam Tad Hedu Vashagam, Hedor Abhavan Nanu Vartade. So what kind of medicine is Charaka, right? Okay. Yeah, so we were, just discussing about the contributions of Charaka. Now we are just looking at the contributions and trying to construct Charaka's personality on the basis of contributions. So Charaka, brought about certain new elements into the way Ayurveda was described and discussed and presented. And one of the key things is Yukti as Pramana, the importance of multi-causality, looking at multiple variables, involved in that. So we can say that Charaka brought this idea of what we today call as complexity in science, complex science. Charaka emphasis on yukti, buddhi pashyati ya bhavan bahukarana yogajan. So the importance of looking at multiple causative factors to understand the dynamics of a particular disease or manifestation, and mentioning that Ayurvedic treatment becomes effective through yukti, being based on yukti, when always looking at multiple factors. This is what gives Ayurveda also a very complex but still rational approach to healing. So this we can say is a unique feature of Charaka Samhita and throws light on his personality in bringing about this rational approach. And Charaka also is very, very particular about the cause and effect relationships. In fact, we have very explicit statements from Charaka like Sarvam tad hetu vashakam, hetor abhava nanu vartade. Any event that happens in this universe has a very specific cause. And if that cause doesn't operate, then, that event dissipates, just disappears. So the whole focus on treatment is to really identify the cause. By identifying the cause and working on the cause, we can modify the effect. So this is a very strong rational approach. And we also find Charaka as a researcher, scientist. Before we get into Charaka's personality as a yogi, I want to also highlight this point that he propagated this concept of pariksha, that everything needed to be investigated upon. We needed to verify, book knowledge or textual knowledge was called as jnana, but that was not considered enough. The physician had to also verify whatever he learned through Aptopadesha or the books through personal investigation or pariksha called through pratyaksh. This process was called as pariksha. And Charaka says, pariksha karino hi kushala bhavanti. That only, so this whole concept of investigation, of, verification, this is something again which you see very much highlighted in Charaka Samhita, and this throws light on Charaka's personality. So concepts related to Sankhya, Nyaya and Vaisheshika. So even though Charaka brought very clearly, that is going to be the key focus of our discussion, concepts from yoga, Charaka has also drawn heavily from other darshanas like Nyaya, Sankhya and Vaisheshika. So Ayurveda has also always been considered as a belonging to the Vedic tradition, although there are many Western scholars who have, other ideas and views. But it is in one textbook called Kashyapa Samhita that this clear relationship between Ayurveda and the Vedas has been very explicitly mentioned. Kashyapa Samhita says, where did Ayurveda originate? Atharva Veda Upanishatsu Pragutpanna. That Ayurveda originated in the Upanishads of Atharva Veda. So we can say that in Vedic medicine is more focused on rituals, whereas Ayurveda is more rational. So it's almost like the relationship between the Karma Kanda and the Jnana Kanda. Like Ayurveda is the Upanishadic, exposition of the medical practices that we can find in the Vedas. So this whole transition of the ritualistic medicine into which Ayurveda calls as Daiva Vyapashraya Chikitsa into Yukti Vyapashraya Chikitsa. This is one of the major contributions of Charaka. So extracting that essence of the medical knowledge in the Vedas and formulating it into the form of an Upanishad. I think this is a idea which we see only in the Kashyapa Samhita, like we say the Bhagavad Gita, Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandana. So the Bhagavad Gita is the essence of even the Upanishads, and Upanishads is the essence of the teachings of the Vedas, the most distilled essence. Now, Charaka Samhita presents Ayurveda as also the distilled essence of the medical knowledge in the Vedas. So many schools are adhered to particular interpretations of Charaka Samhita, and they had their own versions of the text. This is also making the personality of Charaka a little difficult to understand. So these are the Dakshinatyas, Gaudas, Harishchandras, Kashmiras, Maitreyas, Paitamahas, Saindhavas, Shiva Saindhavas, Udichyas, Vaishnavas. They are all representing different traditions, of Charaka, and they all have their own versions of the text, which also makes it challenging to penetrate and understand what is the personality of Charaka. Now, so before we go to the book, now what do we learn from Charaka's personality? There is something very profound in his name. Charaka itself means the wanderer. So that is why it became a title for a lot of eminent personalities, not only related to Ayurveda, but other knowledge traditions of India also, that people who were exploring, who were always wandering, who were traveling far and wide to acquire knowledge. Now, this is a very interesting concept because the three basic textbooks of Ayurveda known as Brihatrayi, the authors, the names are also very symbolic. So we have Charaka, we have Sushruta, and then we have Vagbhada. The works of these three authors are known as the Greater Triad or the Brihatrayis. They constitute the core teachings of Ayurveda. And if you look at these three authors, so to understand the significance of Charaka, we need to also look at Sushruta and Vagbhada. Charaka means the wanderer, the traveler, the explorer. Sushruta means well heard. Listen, well heard. So the listener. So Sushruta, the listener, Charaka, the explorer, and Vagbhada, the perfect articulation. Vachibhada, he expresses everything very clearly. So together, the Charaka Samhita represents the whole process of, the Brihatrayis represent the whole process of knowledge creation. That you have to explore every nook and corner of this earth. You have to learn from nature itself, and you should have a very open mind in receiving knowledge from any part of the world. This idea you can see in Charaka Samhita also. In many places, Charaka says, "Yat chanyadabi, lokanugraha pravrittam parikshagai parikshidam shastravada tadapi aptagama tadapi vedaha." So whatever is knowledge that is generated, other than even what I have mentioned here, coming from anywhere, from any part of the world. So that is the personality of Charaka, that willingness to accept knowledge irrespective of the source, just based on the criteria that he mentions, that it should be parikshikaihi parikshitam. It should have been well examined by investigators, by researchers, credible individuals. That he mentions also as a characteristic of Shastra. That is, Subahad Yashasvi Dhira Purusha Sevitam Aptajana Pujitam. So when it is accepted by the peers, the most reputed people in the society at that time, that is one criteria. So Parikshagai Parikshitam. And Lokanugraha Pravritam, it should be beneficial for the world. So any knowledge that is beneficial for the world, which has been examined and verified by people who are, credible, who have a good, experience in knowledge creation. Shastravadaha, and it should be a Shastravada. It should be a well-developed, Shastra. If that is so, then it is also acceptable as Veda. We can accept it. So this represents the very clear, I'm sorry for that interruption. This clearly points to the idea of Charaka, the name of Charaka as the explorer, the open-minded, researcher who is willing to receive knowledge from everywhere. And then Sushruta is the listener, and then Vagbhada. So before we express any knowledge, there is a background. There is a background of meticulous exploration, meticulous, listening. And after that, only we should actually present that knowledge in a consolidated form. This is the message of Brihatari. And so Charaka makes up a very important component of the basic texts of Ayurveda through this personality of exploration. Now let us look at the book. Now, there are so many editions of the Charaka Samhita, and scholars around the world have worked on it. And it is a bit challenging that we still do not have a very good critically edited version of the Charaka Samhita. And it's also a bit, so I'm not going into all these details, just to give an idea that there's so many versions, so many manuscripts, hundreds of manuscripts are there. And ironically, it's some Western scholars who have taken a very serious initiative to do a critical edition of Charaka Samhita, a group of scholars from Vienna, the University of Vienna. I was also involved in their work at one point of time. They have made that a hypothetical stemma also of the Charaka Samhita. And what they have found is that there are certain recensions of the Charaka Samhita, and there are variations in the whole structure and content. We found earlier that Charaka had a lot of followers, a lot of shakas of the Charaka Samhita was in prevalence. So I'm just telling this to bring out this importance of the necessity of a very elaborate critical edition of Charaka Samhita is needed. This is a future task, and the work that is being done in Vienna is only a very small fraction of what actually needs to be done. They are working only on one section of the Charaka Samhita. And we also have a very useful resource by a group of scholars. This is like a Charaka wiki, charakasamhitaonline.com, which has a very critical interpretation. You can see the original source text and translations, and a lot of critical discussion on various aspects. This Charaka Samhita online is also inspired by Charaka's philosophy himself of making knowledge contemporaneous. So a group of scholars have come together and contributed. I have also contributed to some chapters and its translation. So here we have the fundamental principles, Tattva Vimarsha, then the applied inferences, Vidhi Vimarsha. This is actually what Charaka is always emphasizing. The Vidhi or the applications have to be made contemporaneous. And that is what this whole, and it is an evolving platform. People are still contributing, editing. And there is also reference to text Charakotara Tantra that is mentioned in some other works like Chandrada in Yogaratna Samuchaya, Nischala in Ratna Prabha. They mention about Charakotara Tantra. And even one of the famous commentators of Charaka Samhita, Chakrapani, he seems to have had access to this text. So I'm mentioning all this because, when it comes to Indian knowledge systems, it's actually very, very important that, a lot of reconstruction of these textbooks is done. I think it's very, very important for us to know more about the personality of Charaka because, his contributions are really phenomenal. And I just wanted to point out some gaps in scholarship that we have today. This should, with initiatives like the IKS, Indian Knowledge Systems, I think we need to identify priority areas where we need to do work in the future. And I think one of such priority areas is Charaka Samhita. So we may have lost a lot of knowledge, and the meticulous work that the group of scholars from Vienna did on one portion of Charaka Samhita revealed a lot of variations, variabilities, 134 odd manuscripts of Charaka Samhita collected from libraries worldwide. And they have identified some of the main recensions of Charaka Samhita, the Kashmira Patha and the Vanga Patha, which is the Kashmir and Bengal recensions. And here there are a lot of variations. So before we come to judgments or conclusions about who Charaka was and what was his contributions, we have to come to terms with the fact that we do have knowledge gaps because the Samhita that we have today, the printed version, is not critically edited. So that's a big challenge. So now I would like to highlight a few major contributions of Charaka to the text itself, and then in the last portion we will look at the takeaway message from Charaka. So here I think one of the major contributions of Charaka to Ayurveda is to really position it as a knowledge system. And there is this, the importance of questioning. So even the student is given that freedom to question everything. In the Ayurvedic tradition, akshepa, or finding, all the possible purva pakshas, or, objections to any statement in the text. This was considered a very important part of learning. That, you had the freedom to oppose every statement. And this we find embodied in the personality of Agnivesha, the dialogue between Agnivesha and Atreya, which I think in the redaction Charaka has brought out very, very beautifully. So there is internal as well as external skepticism. What Charaka brought out is that we need to allow questioning, not only from within the tradition, but also from outside. So people are allowed to question Ayurveda, not only the students of Ayurveda, but also skeptics from outside. And here is one encounter, Maitreya asking Agnivesha, questioning the very basis of Ayurveda. So here is Maitreya saying, some people receive Ayurvedic treatment, they get better. Some receive Ayurvedic treatment, they don't get better. Some people, don't receive any treatment, they get better. So there is no correlation at all. How can we say that Ayurveda is really working? So you can see here, the first ideas about actual observation, about actual collection of data based on outcomes of, interventions in patients. So here is a statistical question. Where is the statistics? Where is the correlation? How can you be sure? And here Atreya is, facing this question so boldly. This is so beautifully portrayed by Charaka. Atreya is saying, there is an error in your thinking. You need to look at certain other variables, like, certain diseases don't respond to treatment at all. Here, Atreya is also talking about self-limiting diseases. Now, this is very, very interesting. In Charaka Samhita alone, we find such, rigorous validation of knowledge. So Atreya is talking about self-limiting diseases. He acknowledges that for many diseases, no treatment is required. And I read sometime in the Lancet that 80% of the consultations are for diseases which would have got cured anyway. So people go to physicians just because they need mental strength, a consolation, and that it's not really for the treatment. And this is where Charaka also emerges as a yogi, and he tells us that most of the time you enter into the inner being of the patient. Jnana buddhi pradipena yona vishadi yogavit. Being a knower of yoga, you are able to enter into the inner being of the patient. This is how Charaka represents the physician as a yogi. The yogi who's able to empathize completely, to be with the patient, and then the healing happens automatically most of the time. You don't have to do anything if you are a yogi. So this is a very interesting concept, that being a yogi, you become a better healer because you are able to connect to the patient more profoundly. I find this as the most fascinating aspect of Charaka when he says that most of the time, if you don't interfere, if you can calm down the patient, which to really connect to the patient, you need to be a yogi. You need to be able to understand what's really going on in the mind of the patient. And then you don't need to interfere. You don't need to do anything. The disease will heal because the healing happens inside. This idea of the physician as a pranabhisara, as a friend of the prana of the patient. This is so beautifully elaborated in Charaka Samhita. And this is where Charaka's knowledge of yoga comes in. Pranabhisara. That prana is what keeps the patient alive. And, this is echoing a concept from the Atharva Veda also. Atharvanir Angirasir Daivi Manushya Jauda Oshadhaya Prajayande Edatvam Prana Jinvasi. Oh Prana, when you are there, medicine becomes medicine. When you decide to leave the body, no medicine will work. So the whole focus of Charaka is on that prana. And he says that unless you know the gati of prana, you cannot predict. You don't know when to treat, when not to treat. So in Charaka Samhita, upeksha is also a treatment strategy. Maitri, karunya marteshu, you must be a friend of your patient. And you must have compassion, karunyam, arteshu. But that does not mean that you will jump and treat every patient. This is why Charaka says sometimes Ayurveda does not work. Sometimes it works because you are intervening without a clear understanding of the disease. When you have a clear understanding where intervention is needed, and then you give the intervention, it will always work. If you don't understand this, and this you cannot understand if you do not know yoga, if you do not have a deeper understanding of the person's prana. So when the prana is already leaving the body, this is a very interesting aspect of Charaka also, because he was a yogi, he understands death. He understands that death is something which we must know how to deal with death. Today, death is considered as a failure of medicine, but Ayurveda tells us that you must prepare for death. Prakristeshu bhuteshu upeksha. Live. Allow the patient to die comfortably. Allow the prana to leave the patient's body without, creating a conflict. And when there is a possibility to heal, then leave no options, unexplored. Do your best, because if prana is on your side, then you can treat the patient. So this whole idea of the human body as an expression of prana, I think this gives a very deep insight into Charaka's personality as a yogi. He applies, I think, this concept of applying certain concepts in yoga in the context of medicine, especially this idea of prana as the basis of life, and bringing that knowledge. Later acharyas mention also that if you are not a yogi, then you may try your best. Pranasya kutilo gati. The gati of prana is kutila. Only a yogi can understand that. So if you are not a yogi, then you always have to try to do yavat kantagada prana tavat bhaishajam ajaret. If you are not a yogi, try to do your treatment till the patient is breathing even from his throat, because you don't know the gati of prana. But Charaka is confident, like a yogi. He says, I know the gati of the prana of the patient, so I know when not to treat. Allow the patient to die in dignity. This is a very interesting concept in Charaka Samhita, and I think this comes from the yogic, knowledge that Charaka has. So this is Atreya's answer. Treatment and treatment are not equal. There are diseases which are self-limiting, and Charaka also says, if you cannot justify that the patient got better with your treatment, it is accidental success or chance effect. Vina tarkena ya siddhi yadricha siddhirevasa. So like a modern statistician, you can see Charaka discussing so many thousands of years ago, when a patient gets better, is this really due to my treatment, or did I harm the patient? This is also Charaka saying, sometimes non-interference is better. Your interference, mithyobajarajanya, the physician becomes a cause for the suffering of the patient. So it is that space in which Charaka is trying to create a prognosis, with deep yogic knowledge, where to intervene and where not to intervene. So chance effect and real effect, this is that's a very beautiful statement in Charaka Samhita. Prati niyamiki siddhi. Yadricha siddhi is accidental success. So you treat a patient and the patient gets better. So here Charaka says, Natra vaidyaha roga pramokshe karanam. Here the physician is not the cause for the cure. Gunakshara Nyaya. He uses a Gunakshara Nyaya. A worm may be taking the shape of an alphabet, but it does not know it is an alphabet. Like that, some clinicians just, throw stones at the mango, and the stones may fall, and they think that it is their treatment that has worked. So bringing this rational element, I think this is something which is very significant in the history of medicine. This is very significant in the history of medicine, that this idea of differentiating chance effect and real effect in treatment is a very unique contribution of Charaka Samhita. We need to really place it historically, at the time period. For that, some more scholarly work is required. Bringing the rationalization into medicine, which is now attributed to Greek system, that all medicine became rational through Hippocrates and Greek system. But if you look at Charaka Samhita, you can find elements of rationality that is very, very modern and contemporary. So this is about chance effect and real effect. And there are many early discoveries also in Charaka Samhita. So Charaka was a yogi, which I'm coming to towards the end of my discussion, but he was also a great scientist. I mean, yoga karma sukhaushalam. I think because he was a yogi, he could excel in every area that he touched his hand. He could also become an excellent scientist. Charaka Samhita talks about microbiome, sahaja krimis, that our body is inhabited with so many of them are invisible. Kejit saukshmyad adarshanaha. Invisible microbes are populating our body. This is an idea from Charaka Samhita, which we know is very modern. Then we have genetics. Charaka is, speculating about how, so what I want to highlight here is that as we come to the conclusion, we will find that Charaka says that yoga is the ultimate medicine. But that does not prevent us from looking at also other, mundane realities of the physical body, which he does not ignore at all. So how to keep your vision balanced on the ultimate goal of yoga, but still how you should be dealing with your day-to-day problems with a very pragmatic approach. I think this is something which Charaka Samhita offers to us, how a yogi would look at disease and still not lose sight of the higher goal of yoga. This is what Charaka wants us to look at us. So we have very deep theories about genetics. This is seen only in Charaka Samhita, Bija, Bija Bhaga, Avayava, which almost looks today like the genome, the chromosome and the genes, this division. I'm not claiming that they knew about this, but Charaka says that every part of your body is represented in the seed form, in the male and female, reproductive parts. And if any one part or part of that has a stress, that particular organ in the body would get affected. So there is a clear idea of genetic transmission of diseases. Charaka also talks about cell division or Jiva Paramanu. Charaka talks about quantum dimension of reality, where particles are being created and destroyed in the wink of an eye. Nimesha kalad bhavanam bhava kala shigradarote. So it is a very fascinating textbook which gives you multiple paradigms to understand reality. What I mentioned here now, we have the cellular dimension, the microbiome, the genetic dimension, the quantum dimension. And Charaka presents Ayurveda as a Shashwata Shastra, but evolving and adapting, having very sound, unchanging principles, but continuously. So Charaka clearly says that the Upadesha or Avabodha is not Shashwata. Only the principles are Shashwata. So he creates a framework, for continuous updation of Ayurvedic knowledge, which I think is not seen in any other textbook. Charaka tells us how we can hold on to what is living and relevant in Ayurveda, how we can take the bold steps to eliminate what is not relevant. I think this is a big bold step that we need to take today to make Ayurveda contemporary. Because Charaka says in certain contexts, Ata param tarkyam eva. So he says, this is tarkyam. This portion of my text is tarkyam. So it's not final. This part of the text is final. It is verified. It is up. This is aptopadesha. This is so. This distinction, this gives us the opening or the space for continuous evaluation and refinement of knowledge. So these are all the contributions of Charaka. So Charaka says also that knowledge should be open-ended. Satyevam api nirdeshe. Even when there is an instruction in the text, don't follow it blindly. Yogaireva chikitsan hi desadhyatnyu avarad. Satyevam api nirdeshe kuryad uhya swayam dhiya. Subudhyevam sahasrani kotirvapi vikalpayet. So Charaka is always emphasizing on new knowledge. And in fact, he says that new knowledge should be discovered. Every generation, some new knowledge has to come. Anukta Jnanam, this is what Charaka is emphasizing. So I have created this text for three types of disciples. The Alpa Buddhi, the Madhyama Buddhi and the Uttama Buddhis. And what Charaka is expecting from the Uttama Buddhi, Buddhi Madam to Swanumana Yukti Kushalanam Anuktartha Jnanaya. What is the new knowledge that my student gets? That is what makes my teaching complete. So whenever a Shishya or a student develops new knowledge, that is when, the teaching becomes complete and, fulfilled. So Charaka says that this is a knowledge system which we can apply to discover new knowledge also. And now I would like to come to the last part of our discussion, Charaka as a yogi. And if you go by the theme of our series, Yoga Karmasu Kaushalam, what we understood was up to now was Charaka's personality as, his Kaushalam in all his activities, how he succeeded as a redactor, as a samskarta, how he brought the elements of science, discovery, multiple paradigms into the thinking of Ayurveda. And that Kaushalam we can attribute to his personality as a yogi. So there are many reasons to consider that Charaka was a yogi and also a Yogiraj. And of course, this has been acknowledged in tradition. This is not a hypothesis because he is considered to be an incarnation of Patanjali, the author of the Yoga Sutras. So here, definitely Charaka Samhita, we have an author who is acknowledged by tradition to have been a yogi. So that makes our job easy. And what is the evidence that we see in the Charaka Samhita itself to show that Charaka had this focus on yoga? So in Charaka Samhita, we see explicit references to yoga. This is a, if you look at Ashtanga Hridayam or Sushruta or any of the other texts, this combining of yoga and Ayurveda, especially using of asanas for treatment, this is very, very modern and new. This has more happened in the Western tradition. Probably the reason is that in India, yoga was already in practice. There was no need in the text to, bring them together. But Charaka Samhita alone, we see clear references to yoga. Again, we don't see the Ashtanga Yoga in Charaka Samhita. We are seeing actually the core teaching of yoga itself. We don't see the asanas or pranayamas, but yoga as the only tool, yoga as the ultimate treatment. Charaka Samhita divides treatment into two categories. Laukiki Chikitsa, which is the worldly treatment, which he says is temporary. Today we consider modern medicine as temporary, symptomatic, and Ayurveda as something more permanent, rooting out the disease. But Charaka says Ayurvedic treatment is also temporary. There's a big debate on whether Ayurveda can completely cure diseases. And Charaka says no. As long as karma is there, as long as raga is there, as long as chitta vrittis are there in the mind, all treatment is temporary. So even if we today claim that Ayurvedic treatment has no side effects and it can root out the disease, Charaka does not, accept this. Charaka says all Ayurvedic treatment is temporary because the patient has the raga or, the ignorance. As long as there is ignorance. Samagram dukkham ayatam avijnane dvayashrayam. All this pain and suffering is from avijnana or lack of jnana in the mind. And sukham samagram vijnane vimalecha pradishtadam. Only when you get that knowledge, that highest knowledge, you can bring an end to this suffering. So this treatment Charaka calls as naishtiki chikitsa. So this is a very interesting and very important concept. Today we are using yoga maybe to cure some physical ailment. It is helpful for that. But Charaka has really given us that framework. Charaka says Ayurveda is a preparation for yoga. You need Ayurveda as long as your mind is not in your control. Once the Chittavritti Nirodha has been attained, then you are doing the ultimate treatment. So we often also today create this narrative saying that yoga shouldn't be reduced to medicine. Yoga is more than medicine. But in Charaka Samhita, we see that yoga has been elevated to the ultimate treatment. Medicine itself has been elevated by making it synonymous with yoga, by saying that it is only when we treat our mind that we are able to really treat that individual, really give him the chance or him or her the chance of health that can be sustained. This you can see in Ashtanga Hridayam, Ragadi Rogan Satatanu Shaktan, this Ragadi Rogas of the mind, which is there continuously and constantly. Only that person is considered as a physician who is able to eliminate the Ragadi Rogas of the mind. You don't become a Vaidya by eliminating physical illness. This is what Charaka is coming to ultimately. That eliminating physical illness is only preparing the patient to receive the higher knowledge of yoga. And Vaidya means one who knows, one who transmits this knowledge to the patient. So that is the role of the Vaidya that we see in Charaka Samhita. So I want to point out here that Charaka was a Yogiraj because he wanted his patients to get the experience of yoga. And for him, physical treatment, he accepted physical treatment because that was a necessary step to prepare the patient for the experience of yoga. So here he tells so explicitly, where does this pain and suffering, when does it come to an end? Yoge mokshe cha sarvasam vedananam avartanam. In yoga and moksha, all this pain and suffering comes to an end. Mokshe nivrittir nishesha. In moksha, there is complete cessation, and yogo moksha pravartaka. So here we have in Charaka Samhita a very clear perspective, a very clear framework which brings Ayurveda, yoga and moksha shastra together. Ayurveda is yoga pravartaka and yoga is moksha pravartaka. And this is the actual treatment. So Ayurveda is Veda because this is the Vedic vision, pravritti nivritti marga, giving you Abhyudaya as well as Nishrayasa. So the Abhyudaya in Ayurveda is the freedom from physical illness. But Ayurveda warns us that that physical wellness should not, be a deterrent for you from achieving a higher level of wellness. And that higher level of wellness is yoga. And this is what Charaka Samhita is clearly emphasizing. So there is a definition. Very interestingly, we know yoga chittavritti nirodha. Maybe this is a commentary of that definition from Patanjali, which you see only in Charaka Samhita. What is yoga? Charaka says, Atmendriya manorthanam sannigarshat pravartade sukha dukkha manarambhad atmasthe manasi sthire nivartade tadubhayam vashitvam chobajayade sarirasya Yogajnastam yogam rishayo vidu. So Charaka is giving this idea that yoga is a state which you can achieve when you are embodied. It is not an escape from your body. Yoga is a state in which you can live with embodiment and gradually work your way towards that ultimate dissolution in the universal self. And when you live, with yoga in your physical body, you also give the best offering to the whole of creation. There is no better benefit that you actually begin to serve society only when you become a yogi. Before that, everything that you do is a preparation. Even the charity that you do, if you are not a yogi, is only a preparation or an attempt to evolve your personality. It is only when you become a yogi that you are able to live a life of balance, a life of contribution. And that is a rina that you have to complete until you reach that higher state of moksha. So this is the vision of life that Charaka is bringing to us, and yoga has been an integral part of this overall vision of life. And Ayurveda is Ayusho Vedam. It is the Veda of life. And Charaka tells us, defines Ayurveda also as hitahitam sukham dukkham ayustasya hitahitam manam cha tacha yatroktam ayurveda sauchyade. How can you have a hita life? Hita life is life which is good for the society, and at the same time sukha life, sukha which is good for you. So this definition of yoga here says that whenever there is a contact between the sense organs and the sense objects, there is the possibility of pain and pleasure. And until your mind becomes stable in yourself, this samsparsha of the senses and sense objects will continuously create, a flow of painful and pleasurable sensations. And it is only by making your mind established in your own self. This, interestingly, is also the definition of arogya or health in Ayurveda, is a yogic definition. Swasmin sthiyate iti swastha. The one who is established. Now that word swastha is just another way of explaining, giving the definition of yoga from Yoga Sutras. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha tada drashtu swarupe avasthanam. That swarupa avasthanam is what is called as swasthyam or swasthara. So in Ayurveda, arogyam is the first step where you eliminate the disease. But you shouldn't stop at arogyam. From arogyam, we have to go to swasthyam. So Ayurveda is the beginning and yoga is the end. Yoga is also not the end. From yoga, you work your way towards the highest thing. So Ayurveda also Charaka Samhita also describes the Ashtavitham Yoginam Aishwaram. Shuddha Sattva Samadhana Tat Sarvam Uvirjayade. So Ayurveda is pointing out these Aishwarams are used by the clinician for diagnosis, for better helping the patient. That is the reason why this is mentioned here, that a Yogavit is able to enter the patient's inner being more effectively and able to become a real catalyzer, a friend of the prana of that individual. So aveshas chedaso jnanam arthanam chandada kriya drishti shrotram smriti kandir Ishtadaschapya Darshanam. These are the 8 Aishwaryas. This is different from the Ashtaishwaryas mentioned in other texts. So, these are very unique contributions to yoga in Charaka Samhita also. Entering the body of others, thought reading, doing things at will, supernatural vision, audition, miraculous memory, uncommon brilliance. These were all considered to be essential for the clinician to become an adept in diagnosis. So this is also the reason why Ayurveda Charaka says that a yogi becomes a better physician than others. So eliminating the rajas and tamas from the mind and entering into that state of yoga was considered an essential aspect of the training of the physician. A yogi becomes a true Vaidya, and a true Vaidya, a true yogi also transmits this knowledge and transforms other individuals also into yogis, and only then suffering comes to an end. So this is how we can see that Charaka placed medical science in the yogic and Vedic tradition of India. That has been the greatest contribution of Charaka as an individual, that he was very wary of medicalization of Ayurveda, using this medical knowledge only for healing some physical illnesses. That was what Charaka did not want to happen. Rather, he says it's very important to deal with physical illnesses, but with the purpose of using that, the outcome of treating a physical illness to enter into that higher state of yoga. And if that is not done, then we are really wasting the resources that we have at our disposal as human beings. So in this way, I would like to conclude by saying that Charaka was truly a Yogiraj, and his contributions in bringing the yogic perspective to Ayurveda and bringing this framework of medical science, yoga and Moksha Shastra together into one single framework. I think this is a very phenomenal contribution. And my salutations to Charaka on this occasion of International Yoga Day for these unique contributions that he has made in bringing yoga into other disciplines and showing how yoga, because we do talk about yoga karma sukauchalam, but Charaka demonstrated how by becoming a yogi, a physician can become more kushala or more efficient and also go beyond medicine into the higher purpose of human life. So with these words, I conclude by saying, quoting Charaka again, the true clinician is a yogi. Jnana buddhi pradipena yona visadi yogavit aturasya andaratmanam nasarogam chikitsadi. The clinician who cannot enter into the inner being of the patient through the power of yoga is unable to treat the disease. So if you want to know yourself, you have to become a yogi. Tasmad yogi bhavarjuna. For the patient, to know oneself is a first step to deal with ourselves. So yoga helps us to understand ourselves. And for the physician, know thyself. The physician also has to know himself so that he can understand others better. And that is how Charaka brings yoga into the context of Ayurveda. So pranams and prostrations to the Yogiraj Charaka, and thank you for this opportunity